Hi, and welcome to week 9 of Design for Life Bible study. This week we get to look at a very important topic, obedience. Not one we love, granted. None of us like the name obedience. It kind of sounds like something that we've run from most of our lives, and yet it's an essential part of being a Christ follower. We're going to look this week at the wise man who builds his house on the rock. We read about it in Luke 6:46 and 49. And in this passage, Jesus is speaking, and he tells this story because he wants us to understand spiritual truth. And this is oftentimes how Jesus helps us to understand truth. He tells a story, a parable. These people didn't actually exist, but he tells a story, and we can imagine if they did, because the principle in it is transferable. It's something we can apply to our lives today. And in this story, he starts off by saying, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord? Anybody who comes to me has to hear me and then do what I say." And yet what Jesus knows is that many of the people who are there and are listening, they're hearing, but they have no intention of doing any of the things that Jesus tells them to do. They just want to hear. They want to have their ears tickled, but they don't want to have their hearts convicted. And Jesus is pointing out that that is completely inconsistent. You can't just hear and not do. In fact, we read in James 1:22, where James writes, "Don't just be a hearer, but also a doer of the word." There is nothing good that happens from just hearing and no follow-up. Don't do it. He says you hear it. It should spur you on to works. You actually have to do something with that information. And so Jesus tells this story about two men who build a house. And he says one guy builds his house on a rock while the other guy builds his house on a sand. And he's speaking to the foundation. All of us have a foundation under our houses where we live. Because here in California we have earthquakes, there's certain requirements as to how that foundation must be built. So that if the house is shaken, we also have some magnificent rivers that run through our city. If they overflow their banks and there's a flood, that foundation is expected to stand. You see, the foundation might not be the most exciting part of a home. When we drive through a neighborhood, we don't oogle at people and say, "Wow, look at that foundation." But the foundation is the most important part of the entire structure. And so Jesus knows this, and he tells this story, and he says, what if you built a house? It might be a fantastic house, but you built it on the sand. And the flood waters came. What would happen? Well, sand, when it's brushed by water, moves very easily out of the way. And so everybody listening would know right away, well, of course, what's going to happen is the house is going to come crashing down because the waters would push the sand out, the foundation would be gone, and there would be nothing left holding up the house. And Jesus says that's what it's like when you hear, but you don't do. You haven't actually done anything with what I gave you. And it's completely foolishness. Foolish as much as a guy who builds his house on the sand. A wise man, however, will build his house on a rock. And when the floods come and the waters come, that house will stand firm because of the foundation. And what he's telling us is that we should be wise in how we use what we've been given. Do you know the truth? Look, you can know everything without doing anything, and it still means nothing. There's no shortcut that you can take. You've got to do it God's way. Shortcuts don't pay. And so all of us, as we live life, we come up against these decisions and we're tempted to go, you know what, I think I'm going to sit this one out. You know what, that just seems like the hard way. I'm going to do it the easy way. I'm going to build my house on the sand. I'm going to be a fool. It might be enticing, but calamity is coming. Instead, God says, why don't you do it the right way from the beginning? When I tell you the truth, put it into action. Make it part of your life. Start making your decisions based on the truth that you now know. You see, obedience is the engine that drives goodness. Goodness doesn't happen in our lives until we've built the foundation of obedience.